go ahead and get started. Let me successfully try to share my screen again. Okay, that should be up. It says I'm screen sharing. It is funny, Judge Reader and I were just talking before we began the differences between Zoom presenting and presenting in person. And the biggest one right now is you are just talking into a void when you are presenting on Zoom. So I assume you are all smiling at me and, generally nodding as I begin this presentation. So I'm really excited to be presenting today with Judge Reader on transitioning into a senior associate. Changing my slides. Here we go. I've got a nice bio slide of Judge Reader that I'm surprising her with. Hopefully everything's accurate. I'm sure you all know she's a judge on the 234th District Court and has been for the past about 3 years. Harvard Law School grad, was an associate at Baker Botts and AZA, and a couple other firms in there too. I just chose the longest ones, and then was an ADA for 5 years. A rising star by Texas Super Lawyers Magazine, faculty member for NEDA, and also does a lot in the community. Junior League of Houston, board of directors for the Catastrophic Theater and for Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast. So definitely a great person to be giving us some guidance today on how to, kind of do it all and clearly be very successful. I should also mention that Judge Reader has a family, and I have personally seen her in spin class before, if I recall correctly. I've never said hi because at 5 in the morning, I feel like one should not talk to a judge, especially not in one's workout clothes, but that's just a personal preference of mine. And then my bio, just so y'all know why I'm here. I'm an associate at YetterColeman. I'm also the pro bono coordinator. I went to UT, graduated in 2015. So I'm about a, 7-year associate. Clerked for Justice Lehrman right out of law school. And then I actually started my career at Baker Botts with some of y'all, I think I saw on the chat. So I did like a 1.5 years in Dallas, moved to Houston, did a 1.5 years, and then came over to YetterColeman. I put some of my accolades on there, but it's weird to read them out myself, so you can just read them. I am on the HYLA board and also the HYLA board, which I have really enjoyed. And in previous years, I have volunteered with Adopt an Angel, and this last year I was the chair. So today we're going to be talking about kind of the keys to success as I see them, as hopefully Judge Reader sees them. Hopefully this can be, a conversation, not just between Judge Reader and I, but also between y'all if you have questions, if you have thoughts as we're going through. But really this presentation just came out of a conversation that I was having with Alvin, our HYLA president, on how I wish that somebody would have kind of sat me down and talked to me about what was coming as I progressed through law firm life. I think that for me, and maybe for a lot of us, you go to law school, you interview with a big firm, you get started, and you just, you do good work, you work really hard, and then one day you look up and your role is kind of changing and it's time to start thinking a little bit more proactively about the future. And so I think the earlier that we can all start that process, the more successful you will be. And so hopefully we can all learn some things and have some good discussion today. So the first key to success, confidence. They say confidence is key. I like to remind myself that you are an expert at being an associate. And this is based on science, which is, this 10,000 hour rule. There was a book, and I meant to look it up before this presentation. I can't even remember what the book was, but it was all about how, across every different discipline, once you spend 10,000 hours on something, you're pretty good at it. And so at this point, if you're 5 years into your legal career, you are pretty good at what you do. And I think it's important not to lose sight of that. One of the really fun things I have found about the legal profession is it is different every day, and you're always doing different things. And I think that keeps it really interesting, but can also make it nerve-wracking, where you feel like, how am I this experienced, but I don't know how to do this thing, or how, why don't I know this off the top of my head? And I think it's good to always remember, you know more than maybe you're giving yourself credit for. And the really important thing that you have learned at this point in your career, or that you will learn if you're a younger associate with us, is how to figure things out. It's how to go to the rules, how to look things up, how to ask people. And so, stay confident in what you're doing, use your resources, and just take comfort in the fact that you know more than you think you do. That being said, don't rest on your laurels. It's good to identify what you're good at, but also you need to think about things you haven't done and things that you want to do. Be really intentional about your career and identify kind of those zones of things you haven't gotten to do. Maybe you've taken a ton of depositions, but you haven't gotten to argue anything in court. Or, maybe the opposite is true. Maybe you've gotten to handle some discovery motions, and so you stood up and argued those, but the bigger depots just haven't been coming your way. Identify the things that you want to do going forward in your career and make it known, to the people above you, to people around you. If you're not saying what you need, it's less likely that you're going to get it. And kind of going along with that, I think it's important to honestly evaluate your chances of success in your current environment. I mentioned before, it's really easy. I think we're all super busy to kind of put your head down and do the work you're given. And you don't want to be in a point where you look up and realize, hey, this firm isn't making partners, or, hey, what I really want to do is go in-house and I'm not doing the kind of work for the kind of business I would want to go in-house for. And so you got to think a little bit more long-term about what you want. Maybe that isn't making partner. Maybe it is going in-house. Maybe it's becoming counsel and having a little more work-life balance. Maybe it's public service. Maybe you need to be focusing more on getting involved with political organizations or getting your name out there so someday you could run for something. So, you can't just fall prey to doing the work you're given and assuming that you'll get what you want out of it. You have to really think about what you want and how you're going to get it. So now that I've given a whole spiel on this, Judge Reeder, what do you think is the hardest part about transitioning from kind of a younger associate role to a more senior one?
Yeah, thank you. And I think all of that advice is really wonderful and just a good thing to start thinking about. I think the hardest part, I think, that everybody kind of comes to terms with is sort of that moment where you have to realize, like, okay, now, the time has come, the train has left the station and it's now time to sort of figure out where it's going. You kind of, I use that train analogy because so often I think we feel that way, or at least if you've come out of law school, you've been a summer associate, you go to a law firm, you're kind of on that train, you don't know really where it's going. You kind of have this idea of what law firm lawyers do, what partners do, but I mean, let's be honest, most of us, when we started a law firm as a baby lawyer, don't really know what we're getting ourselves into. But in the beginning, that's okay, because the first couple of years, you're just learning how to be an associate, and there's no expectation from the beginning of that leading anywhere, right? And so you can kind of have that, cushion of a few years of just sort of letting the train, leave the station. But at some point, when you hit, 4, 5, 6 years at the same place, or even if you've moved firms, you've lateraled somewhere, the rubber meets the road and you have to figure out where it is you're going. Otherwise, you look up, 3, 4 years later and you're kind of stuck. So I think in the beginning, in that sweet spot, it's better to get ahead of it and think about, what is it that I really want to do? And sometimes the answer might be, I want to go do something completely different. Or the answer may be, I want to stay and make partner, but I have no idea what that means and how to do it. Or it may be, I want to go transition to a different type of law firm. How do I do that? And the good thing is, for most folks at this sort of beginning senior associate level, you have a lot of options and you really can start to forge your path. You are hopefully an expert at being an associate. So you have sort of the foundational elements of knowing how to be a good lawyer, even if you don't think you know it. And your point is well taken, in that you oftentimes don't realize how good you are until you've had a chance to sort of put that to a test. So, I think the hardest part of that transition is really having to take a hard look at where your career is going, because prior to that, it's very easy for many of us to have sort of been on autopilot, getting through law school, getting the job, checking off those boxes. But you really have to sort of just take account of where it is you're going, because it's easy to compare yourself to all the junior associates, but once you get more senior, then everybody starts splitting off. So you really, can decide, what it is you want to do. And if you don't want to do sort of, the path that you think, you were going for, it's okay to pivot, but you have to, the window is small, or maybe smaller than we would all hope.
Yeah. And I think, the reality is this job is hard. It's time consuming. You don't always get a lot of notice on when your time is going to be consumed, which can be the hardest part. And from what I have seen, the lawyers that are, one, the most successful, and two, have the most longevity, really do love the work. It's like the partners at my firm that are the happiest and bring in the most business, frankly, are the ones that seem to legitimately love what they do. And so, if you're, kind of at this senior point and you're still wondering, do I even like this? It's probably time to take a hard look and think about, you probably like something about the law, hopefully, but maybe it's not being at a firm, or maybe it's not being on partnership track, or maybe you just need to be at a different firm. But, you've got to figure out what you enjoy and pursue that, because otherwise it's going to be a very long career of long hours of asking yourself, why am I doing this? And I think it's especially hard to kind of find your confidence in what you're doing if you're questioning why you're doing it.
Right. And I think, it takes, we've all had those moments where we realize, the world is bigger than our law firm, right? And there's other things that we can do, and you have to figure out whether it's, a completely different career or a completely different path in the law, or if you can sort of fill those needs or get that, kind of get that satisfaction from doing something else, either in your personal life, or like we were saying earlier, getting involved in organizations outside of work, or sort of ways to sort of kind of take account of your well-being. But know that at the end of the day, assuming that you want to stay a lawyer in some capacity, now is the time really where, all of you are, is to really start thinking about how you want to build that career over the next 5, 10, 20 years. That's not to say that you have to have a 20-year plan, because everything changes, but you have to really start taking account of the things that you may want to do, or things that you never want to do again, right? And you can sort of start to do that at this juncture, which is, a really wonderful thing. We're talking about, all of the sort of the bad things about it, or the scary things, but we can also talk about how exciting it is and what a wonderful opportunity it is. The first few years of your career, you're just grinding away, trying to learn how to be a lawyer, and at the end, treading water. Now you really get to start to think about how you want to shift the next season of your career.
Yeah, and that's a really great segue into our next topic, which is time management. And I think you touched on a few aspects of this that I wanted to talk about. The first being, all the things that you can do outside of your firm or outside of your legal job that, one, can bring you a little bit of joy and, some purpose, but also, help your career. And let's just get started. Let's see. So thinking about time management, I think, is really a lesson in prioritizing and delegating. There remain only so many hours in the day. And despite my frequent wish for a time turner a la Hermione Granger, I have not yet found one. And so, you've got to figure out what it is that you have to do and what you can delegate. And I think my slides got out of order here a little bit, but there's some things that you're going to have to take the pin on, or that you need to handle, or that maybe personally it's important for you to handle. Like, for example, if you have kids, it might be important to you to drop them off or to pick them up. Or maybe that's something you're comfortable with your spouse doing, or a nanny. If you are somebody that doesn't enjoy grocery shopping, can you have your groceries delivered, or can you have, again, somebody else handle that? Those are on the personal side, but also, professionally, what are things you have to do and what can you outsource? And I know this was really hard for me to kind of come to terms with, just from liking to have control, things like putting together binders or like checking, kind of nitpicky stuff like that. When I was younger, I was always so worried of, well, if I ask somebody, an assistant or a paralegal, to do it and they do it wrong, I still get in trouble for it. So I'll just do it myself. Well, the older you get and the more responsibilities you have, you'll find that you just don't have time for that kind of micromanagement. And you've got to learn, how to delegate well. So how to give good instructions and what other people's strengths are. And so what you can ask them to do and trust they'll do well. And then also, how to check work in an efficient way. And the things that we have to think about for our clients are, of course, reviewing precedent, managing deadlines, really keeping track of the things that are going to matter to a case. Obviously it's also, you want, for example, your motions to be really clean and not to have typos and not to have, grammatical mistakes, but there is a hierarchy to what is most important. And like not misrepresenting the law to the court is at the top of that list. And like Oxford commas and your personal feelings about them would be at the bottom of that list. Over communication, I think, is also key from a time management perspective. You've just got to let people know what you're dealing with kind of in a lot of different ways. So one, what are your other deadlines at work? What other cases are you on? What things do you have coming up that are set for trial where you're going to need to just kind of completely abandon something else and somebody's got to pick up for you? And then what are your personal obligations? Do you have a planned vacation coming up? Do you have, a doctor's appointment that is going to take half a day? And just, letting people know and letting them know ahead of time. Because when you send the email, if somebody asks you to do something and the first time you've told them, oh, I'm not available today, that can be really frustrating, regardless of how legitimate the reason you aren't available is. And obviously, if something comes up suddenly, your child gets sick and you didn't know they were going to be sick, of course, or your car breaks down or whatever it is, that's a different situation. But things that you have the ability to give people notice on, it is always better to give that notice early and often and just keep people in the loop. And, if you tell people I'm going to trial and then you don't go to trial and you have more time, they're not going to be annoyed with you that you had been telling them for weeks that you'd be gone. I have some personal experience in this matter because I keep telling people I'm going to trial and they keep getting pushed. But so far, nobody is annoyed that I have more time for their cases. Thinking farther down the road is kind of the same idea. Just, it's not just what's coming up next week. You've got to think about if you've got a summary judgment filing that's due in 2 weeks, there's a lot of work that goes into those. You can't start it 3 nights before, a week before. Do you have all the evidence you need? Are you going to be having to contact your client or contact co-counsel or work with other people? Because it's really unfortunate when you reach out to that important client contact and they're on vacation for a week. And so you're pretty hamstrung and you're trying to do things in their absence. And so just knowing what's coming down the pike and being prepared, getting it set up as far in advance as you can. And then also realizing that you are probably not the beginning or the end of the chain of whatever it is you're working on. So thinking about realistically those deadlines, if you tell somebody to give you a first draft by X date, are you going to review it by, whatever next couple of days and send it to the partner? Have you given them enough time to look at it before it goes to the client? Or if it is something that you're going to directly send to the client, how much time do you really need to review it? Have you given the client enough time? Which is probably the most important thing in the whole chain, is giving the client enough time, enough notice to look at stuff before it's due, if that's something they want to do. You've got to know what your clients want. Some of them aren't going to be as in the weeds on reading things, but others want to go through your filings with a fine-tooth comb, and you've got to know that kind of going in. And then for pro bono and community service, I find you've really got to put it in your schedule and you have to block it off and you have to treat it like your work obligations, because otherwise it'll always feel like something that can be put on the back burner or that you'll get to later, or, I'll do it this weekend, or, that can wait a little bit longer. And then you'll look up and realize, I haven't worked on my pro bono case in a month, or, I haven't gone and volunteered at the food bank in 6 months. And, you know, some of the volunteering especially has changed in light of COVID and the opportunities that were available. But, you know, just kind of a plug, like as people are getting back out there, think about things that you used to enjoy doing in the community and whether it's time to start doing those again, and then put them on your calendar like they're obligations. And, you know, just the same way that you will find time to get everything done, even when you have a depot that takes up an entire day in the middle of the week, you will find time to get everything done, even if you spend a couple hours on your pro bono case, or even if you take on a pro bono case. You know, I don't want to derail this CLE, but we do all have, you know, an obligation and I think a privilege to do pro bono, and especially through Houston Volunteer Lawyers and some of our other great organizations in Houston. They make it really easy. They provide templates. They will hold your hand. They'll answer your questions. You know, they just need somebody to kind of take the initiative and work with the client and check out things before they get filed and help people get their cases done. And, you know, just, I think it's probably clear why time management is so important. One, it makes your life better when you can balance things, have a plan, prioritize, have people helping you and using your resources. But two, it will ultimately free up time that you can then use to further your goals. So if your goal is to make partner at your firm, you know, you want to be demonstrating to the partnership that you're invested in the firm. So maybe that's doing things with recruiting. Maybe it's, you know, just spending time helping train younger associates. If you're interested in a career in public service, you know, maybe it's going out to a lot of HYLA events and meeting a lot of the people that one day you're going to be asking to vote for you. If you're trying to raise your profile, maybe it's giving CLEs or writing a paper. But when you think strategically about how you spend your time, then you have more time to do things like that, that otherwise, you know, all that time kind of gets eaten up just doing the billable work. So Judge Reeder, any thoughts on how to best time manage?
Yeah, and I think for right now, I'll focus on sort of professionally. We can spend a lot of time talking about how to delegate and manage our personal lives, but I would go back to a point that you sort of at the beginning of this section, which is I would resist the urge to sort of micromanage and do things yourself, because either it's easier or you think, oh, I'll just do it. It takes more time to give it to somebody else and explain it. I'll just do it myself, for a couple of reasons. One, you're really failing the more junior associates by doing that. And we've all been in those positions where a senior associate or a partner wouldn't give us things to do and let us learn. And so then we're stuck and we don't know how to do things. So you're, on one hand, you're sort of doing a disservice for yourself and you know, your junior associates coming up. But really, at the end of the day, you're doing a disservice to yourself, because you're going to eventually micromanage yourself out of work. And this is why, you know, I think becoming a senior associate or more senior kind of part of a trial team or a team of lawyers is really a delicate dance on how you delegate and split up work, because and realizing how over time, not just the task that you're doing are different, but the way that you're sort of staffing your cases and getting work changes. You know, as a junior associate or, you know, first, second year or third year, you may be working on 1, 2, 3 matters, but you're really delving in them. You're doing, you know, big document reviews. You're doing the first drafts of things. You can really fill your time. You can meet your billable requirements pretty easily when you're on a couple of things, depending on what, you know, the nature of those cases are, because you're expected to just put so much detail into all the work that you're doing. But then when you're more senior, right, you're expected to delegate some of your work down to junior associates. But so then when you do that, you end up giving work away. And we've all known those senior associates that hog work because they're afraid to give it out, not just because they think that they can do it better, but because they're afraid of losing work and they're afraid of losing hours and they're not going to hit their billables. So you have to get ahead of this by, you know, we're going to talk about networking in a bit, but by networking within your firm to figure out where is that extra work going to come from. If I, as a junior associate, am working on 2 matters, but I'm billing, you know, all of my time to those because I'm, drafting things, writing all the discovery, reviewing all the documents, prepping the depot binders, whatnot. As a more senior associate, if I'm expected to give, a chunk of that work down, which you should, where am I going to fill in those gaps? And you do that by taking on more matters or doing more, business development or working with other partners strategically. And so you have to figure out how to get ahead of that so that you're in a position to where you're not worried about losing the work that you're delegating, but that you're meeting enough folks in your law firm, you're meeting enough clients, maybe you're getting your own work at a point where you don't feel like you have to just hang on to everything and do it, because eventually you're going to silo yourself enough and then you meet a big problem. So when I think about time management, it's not just about managing my own time or my own day, but it's setting myself ahead to think, where is the next, chunk of work going to come from down the pipeline, and how am I going to sort of divvy things up? So not only do I have enough work for myself that makes sense, but that the folks, more junior to me have enough work, and knowing where the next thing is going to come in.
Yeah, I'm having some technical difficulties with the slideshow, but I did want to comment that for me, the most difficult part of, kind of realizing I was a senior associate was the realization that you're no longer just kind of managing up and making sure that you do good work for the people that have given you the work. You're also now in charge of managing down and thinking about, again, like what associates can work on which things. How do I utilize their time? How do I make sure I keep in time to review? Because, the first couple of times I delegated, I was so excited. Like it was a time when I'm really busy and I'm like, oh, like this other person can write this motion or can do this draft. And then I kind of just thought like, okay, well, they'll do it. And then it'll go to the partner and then that's it. Like just kind of cut out the middleman. But then, that doesn't necessarily make your partner happy when, they had told you to do something. And then instead of getting that work product from somebody that had the experience and, had done it before and thinking that's what they needed to allocate their time to review, they're getting the work product of somebody that probably needs a little bit more direction. And so that was a learning curve for me to realize, okay, I do need to have somebody else do it, but that doesn't mean I don't touch it at all. I've still got to work with them, think about what they still need to learn, and then figure out how to, teach that to them. So next time they can be more independent and more helpful. And I think that also goes back to the communication point, just talking with the partners on your case, the person giving you the work, to make sure that they're comfortable with that or what they were thinking or what they're envisioning, kind of letting them know that you're going to be working with these different people, and working with all of your staff and paralegals and just anybody that can be helpful. And some of that, micromanaging, like drafting letters, like it is in fact faster for my assistant to like pull up the letterhead and like write the cover letter for whatever. And I don't know why for so long I thought that that was something I should just do. But it's the kind of thing like, maybe it's only saving me 5 to 10 minutes, but 5 to 10 minutes multiple times a week is an hour. And that's an hour I can be doing something else.
Yeah. Well, and part of it is you're never, well, I don't want to say never, but we're not taught that. You come in, you say, use your assistant. Well, what first-year lawyers ever used an assistant before? You don't know. So I think some of that comes with, it takes time and confidence. And obviously every law firm is different in the way cases are staffed and teams are built with partners and associates and senior associates. And so you have to kind of use this advice in your own kind of world. But, it takes time. Delegating and having a working team takes a lot of time. And it's much, but it pays dividends in the end. We all, it takes more time to kind of delegate something to someone junior, give them comments, whatnot. But again, it's so much more useful. And in the future, that will, only help you and help, those that you're working with, help, get to your objective at the end of the day, which is regardless of what it is, whether it's, in litigation or something else. But it takes time. And then, apart from that, your time is really valuable in, your personal and other sort of professional endeavors. And so, you have to just think really strategically about the things that you're doing yourself and the things that you're going to give to someone else to do, whether that's, in your personal life or, at work.
Well, and on the assistant front, I think one of the reasons that was so difficult for me is, when I first started at a law firm, I was 25 or something. And, my assistant was probably in her 50s and had been at the law firm, like literally as long as I had been alive. And the paralegals, same thing, and like knew approximately 35 times more about the law than I did. And I am lucky. My mother is an attorney. And so really like the most formative piece of advice I remember her giving me was just that, the paralegals know more than you do, and you need to treat them as such. And even if you reach a point where you know more, always treat them as a great resource. And so that was something I really took to heart is, do not come in there. And again, everybody I think on this call is probably a little bit past this point, but something I try to pass down when I work with Summers is like, do not come in here your first year out of law school, like some hot shot, and be trying to like boss your paralegals around or like pulling out, well, in Civ Pro, they told me this, and it's also true that sometimes they may be wrong, or maybe you do know something about the rules that they don't, but then have a conversation, have a respectful dialogue about why you disagree on a deadline, or, why you're asking them to do something a certain way. And I think that's a general life rule, treat people with respect, but especially people that you intend to work with in a long career and are asking to do things for you on a daily basis. I think the worst attitude you can have is, kind of one of like, well, it's your job, and so you have to do it. Like, no, like ask them nicely and appreciate what they're doing for you and appreciate the experience and the knowledge that they have. And I've learned so much from mine, like they'll call and explain something to me about the rules or, how the firm does things. Sometimes it's not even a rule or something that happens outside of your firm, but like your paralegals have been at your firm a lot longer, and they've probably worked with your partners a lot longer than you have. And so they can be the ones that give you a heads up, like, hey, this partner really wants everything to be in size 14 font. It's like super easy, but it just makes everybody a little bit happier. And if you haven't been kind to them, they might not tell you that. So extra bonuses.
Yeah, and I think, it's the same thing with court staff too. I mean, people, they're the most, they know everything. My clerks, my coordinators, they know more than me about a lot of the stuff going on the docket, at least the inner workings of, things. So making friends with the court staff is invaluable, and treating them well, because we all know who the people are that are kind to the folks around here and are not. And so especially when we're talking about transitioning to this role, the partner is usually not the one calling and making, scheduling hearings or whatnot. And sometimes the paralegal's doing that. But, as your senior associate, when you're coming in or arguing something, you are getting to interface with court staff so much more, even if you're not the one arguing a motion. So that's another way to make yourself invaluable, is that, getting to know the, judges' staff, because they're the ones that are really running the show a lot of the times.
Well, and I think that goes too for court reporters. It's rare, but, I've been in depositions where I've seen opposing counsel just like be a jerk to a court reporter. If they've asked for a break or they ask, just something, and they'll just cut them off or be really impatient. And maybe this isn't true, but I was also told a long time ago, if you go in and you introduce yourself and you're friendly to the court reporter, they're less likely to record kind of like your ums or your like weird filler stuff when you're younger. Like they have some discretion on the way you come across in a transcript. And also just getting back to the real reason you should do this, which is it's the right thing to do, is treat people kindly and not, act as if you're better than somebody. Everybody's playing a really important role and has a lot of experience and brings something to the table. Moving on to our next topic, business development. Hopefully everybody has already started thinking about this, and the fact that you are attending a HYLA CLE, I think, is a good sign that you are getting involved in community organizations and doing things with your peers, and hopefully going out to happy hours and different things and kind of mingling. And that is kind of the biggest first step, is focusing on relationships you already have and building on those. I find it's always easiest when you go to some kind of event and one person, and then that person's like, oh, hey, have you met my friend so-and-so? And then the next time you go to an event, so-and-so is there, and then they might introduce you to somebody else. And so it's so much less daunting to approach things that way than going into a room completely cold. I have also done that, you know, like when I first moved to Houston, I knew that I knew people here from law school, but I didn't necessarily know what events they would be at or, you know, what kinds of things they were attending. And so sometimes I'd go to receptions and I'd look around and realize, you know, I don't know anybody in this room. And so I just adopted this like rule that I had to meet 3 new people at every event I went to, and then I was allowed to leave. And so, you know, it's like I'd go up and just introduce myself, and you're all there usually if it's a lawyer thing, you know. And sometimes I would just say like, hi, like I'm Amy, I don't know anybody here. Like, what do you do? And it just makes a really easy, you know, kind of icebreaker. And I did that enough, I guess, as a baby lawyer, it became a lot easier. I recently went to a wedding where I didn't know anybody except the bride and groom, who are somewhat useless people to know at a wedding, as they're not there to talk to you. And my husband was supposed to be there and he was off or late or something. And so I like walk into this fancy reception. I'm like, I don't know anybody here. So I just like did it again. I went up to somebody and I was like, hi, like, I don't know anybody here. I'm Amy. And people will generally be nice to you. So it like kind of sucks the first time you do it, but it gets easier. And I think it's kind of part of what we do, which is networking and finding a way to talk to everybody, even somebody that you maybe on the surface don't have something in common with. Speaking of relationships you already have, this is a little bit more about conflicts than necessarily about business development. But, you know, when you're focusing on relationships you have that may be personal ones with other lawyers, it may also be relationships that your firm has with clients. And, you know, I think a really good piece of advice is always the best networking you can do is actually the work that you do for the clients you have, and then spending time with those clients and hoping that they bring in additional work. Now, what also may happen, and hopefully eventually does happen as you meet more people and you get more work, is somebody may bring in some business or ask you if you can take on a case or even just an issue that the firm is already working on the other side of, or is working for a client that has, you know, longstanding conflicts with the client that's contacted you now. And so you've really got to know, you know, what your firm does, or at least be aware of what the process is for figuring that out. You know, who do you need to go talk to if somebody calls you up and wants to hire you to look into something? Because just from an ethics standpoint, before we can do any of that, you need to make sure you're not going to be prejudicing a client you already have, that you've already signed up, or doing anything that could create an awkward situation you've got to kind of back yourself out of later, or explain to some like major rainmaker partner in your firm why you've now conflicted him out of some business or her out of some business, you know, for some case that never even came to fruition, but they sent you some documents or something. So, you know, just always being cognizant. I think for one, I'm really eager to get business. And so if I didn't have somebody telling me like, hey, you have to be careful, I'd probably just start, you know, telling everybody right and left, like, yeah, we'll figure it out, and then getting myself in trouble. So always good to be on the front end of those things. I already touched on keep doing good work. Be intentional about your networking. And this kind of goes back to the time management point, which is, you know, there's only so many hours in the day. And so you need to be strategic. And I think the best advice I've ever gotten on that is thinking about what you're interested in and how you can use that to expand your network. So for me, Adopt an Angel was something that fit, you know, kind of a lot of my boxes because I care about the community and service and giving back. And in particular, Adopt an Angel serves children in low income areas, which is something I've always felt really passionate about. It's the holidays, you know, spreading cheer, that kind of makes me feel nice, which is always a bonus. But then because it's through a lawyer organization, you know, all the time I'm spending, not only is it going towards all these kids and doing a lot of good, but I'm also spending time with lawyers that I might not have otherwise met because they work, you know, in-house or they do different things. And maybe that results in business for me at some point, but also maybe it just results in me meeting interesting people that care about the things that I care about. And so that time I'm spending, I never resent it. You know, there's so many ways that it is good for me and good for the community and, you know, just time well spent. And so if you think about the groups that you want to be a part in that way, then when your board meetings run long or your service opportunity ends up being a little bit more than you realized you were biting off, you know, you can take comfort in the fact that there's a lot of, you know, pros in the pro chart, and this one con of it kind of not being what you expected can be overcome. Okay. So Judge Reader, what sage advice do you have for us on networking?
So, yeah, I mean, I think all of that is great advice. You have to, two things. One is, when we're thinking about networking and you're thinking about, what is the purpose of it? And if the purpose, and this is sort of in a business development sense, so the purpose of, ultimately potentially getting work or making those client relationships at some point. And, like you said, when you're a senior associate at a law firm, depending on the size of your law firm, you may be expected to start to bring in business. You may not be, but you never know. This goes back to the beginning of our conversation where when you're thinking ahead and what you're going to do next, you never know where the work is going to come from. My husband left a large law firm in 2020 and started his own boutique with a couple of other of his former partners. And, it's amazing how all of a sudden, the work started coming in from people that he knew and that he had kept up with over the years, either, former attorneys from that firm, friends from law school, other people we've met. We moved to Houston in 2009, and I always tell the story, and we're not from Houston, my husband and I are both from the Dallas area. And so we knew some folks here in Houston, but not really. We came here for work. And so I remember going to, I think it was the Harvest Party, one of our first years, which of course is obviously a wonderful party. We go every year now when they have it. And I remember walking in and being like, I don't know any of these people. I'm a baby lawyer, we got tickets from the firm. And I just remember seeing these, folks that just know everybody there. And I'm thinking like, how am I ever going to get to a point like that? Which is obviously an incredibly naive way to think. But over time, you start, and it helps to be extroverted, or it helps to be social and enjoy going to do things. And I think obviously networking is harder for those that don't like to meet new people. But either way, over time, it's, they're the people that you work with, they're the people that you're involved with, in bar association activities, other activities that have nothing to do with the law at all, whether it's, politics, civic associations, church, other volunteer work. When I was involved in the junior league, I met a lot of other women that way. And over time, you kind of just continue your network. And then, you start to go to functions and people there. And then, more people there. And all of a sudden you're at a point in your career where you can walk into pretty much any room full, whether it's lawyers or not, and somebody there. And I would say as you're networking, and if you want to be really deliberate about it, which you should, make a list, like literally have a list, like a handwritten list or something on your computer of basically every person you know. And it's sort of a master list of everyone how you know them, if you know them from law school, if you know them from work, if you know them from a random happy hour that you met them, write their name down. If you have their contact information, write their contact information down, how you know them, and just keep a list. And then as you're, going through your year or your month, take somebody out to lunch every single week. If you have, obviously some weeks are busy, but try to schedule lunch or coffee or breakfast, with somebody every week. And over, the course of a year, that's 50 people on your list that you've just made a deliberate effort to stay in touch with, so that later down the road, when they have something, they get a case or they hear something, oh, I can't handle that, but, you're on their mind. And it's incredibly invaluable that just, that sort of primacy and recency phenomenon. If you're kind of around a lot and you keep those connections up, folks are going to think of you when it comes time to give work away or come up with other opportunities too, whether it's not just client development, but as you're thinking for your own career of sort of the next thing to do, whether it's going to a new law firm, starting your own law firm, those conversations come up. So just keep yourself relevant and keep, just keep up those relationships in an organic way, right? I mean, it's easy to see through people. Lawyering is transactional in nature, but you have to be genuine in your endeavors. Otherwise, obviously, it's not going to come across the way that you want it to.
Yeah, I once received some advice like that from a partner at Baker Botts Dallas, and he had this very intense spreadsheet, and it had like like spouse's name, kid's name, interests, like prior things that they had done together. And he had some set goal of reaching out to a certain number of people. And then I think they were even ranked by, these people, I need to make a point of contact with them once a quarter, these people more so, whatever. I have not personally reached that point. And, he was actually one of the guys who brought in a lot of business to that office. And so his kind of a little bit of chicken and egg. I don't know if the system was working for him or if he was just somebody that already had this very extensive network and then at some point had to organize it. But, for me, I think the most helpful thing has been kind of like never letting people go, people that you used to know or people, that you've had any kind of personal connection with that you can refer back to or bring something up that they'll be interested in. So, not just sending out, the same article that everybody's going to get or the same news or the same, update in the law or whatever, or the same like LinkedIn button, congratulations. But, if you like once got into a conversation with somebody about how much they enjoy the symphony, and then you see that same composer or conductor is coming back into town, sending something about that and asking if they'd be interested in going. Or, for me, I still have friends from when I was in Dallas and they were mid-level associates when I was a young associate when I left. When I saw they made partner, I sent them more than just the congrats. It was like a heartfelt, like, you taught me so much when I worked with you. And, again, like some of these things will never turn into anything, but you just never know, maybe that person is a partner now in Dallas, but then they decide to go in-house, or maybe there's something that their firm is conflicted out of and it's a matter in litigation in Houston or whatever. And again, just, these are people that I liked and respected, and it's always nice to keep up those relationships. So, but to do that, kind of to your point, you have to have the list and kind of like remember, because so many people come and go in our lives. And if they're not super active on social media, they might just kind of fall into the back of your brain if you're not kind of keeping yourself up to date on, people that you do care about and respect and want to keep up a relationship with.
Yeah. And I guess, it also goes to sort of some of your non-legal activities, whether not illegal activities, but non-legal activities, where you're involved in other organizations, because it's a way to meet people. And, I like to think when my husband and I were both involved in some, organizations, both on the board, outside of the law, you get to know people in development, and fundraisers are like the best networkers, obviously, because it's their whole job is to like make connections, figure out, have those spreadsheets about donors and how, when you have to contact them and how, and when you sort of learn to pick those people's brain on how to do it in a way that's deliberate, not only are you just, first of all, getting, helping an organization that you feel passionately about, regardless of whichever one that is, and so getting to see how that governance works and how development works for an organization, which you can easily sort of translate to networking, in a law firm way. You're also meeting people, you're meeting, donors around town for organizations that also obviously in many ways end up, needing to make connections with lawyers for different things too. So I always think some of the work that we did with organizations where we got involved in learning about the development aspect were so invaluable, not just for my own skills on learning, how to make those connections, but also the actual substantive connections that we made that are still some of our, dearest friends and best connections over time.
All right, so we are about 9 minutes from our end time. So some takeaways, and then we would love to take questions. Oh, I did too. Of course, we started talking about confidence. And so one, just be confident, but also ask for feedback, commit to using it. It can be tough to take constructive criticism, but, identify the partners that you work with, that you really respect their opinion, and figure out where you have room for growth, and then, take that growth and view it as an opportunity. Pursue your interests. That's only going to boost your confidence when you're really doing something that you love. And, going to CLEs is a way that you can explore some new areas. If there's something in the law that you're interested in, I really like going to CLEs on pro bono topics that I know nothing about. Because one, it might be useful to me in a future pro bono case, and two, just kind of keeps me up to date on, what the different pro bono needs are in the community. Time management. One of the things that I think I kind of touched on, but, notice the associates that you enjoy working for and how they handle themselves. I can remember back from when I was a baby to a little bit more mid-level, the associates that kind of didn't stress me out or I didn't dread working for. And so identifying, what they're doing well and how you can emulate that. And hopefully those associates are going to be the same ones that the partners seem to enjoy working with. But, if there's some other subset of associates that the partners are kind of acclimating to, identify what it is. And probably the answer is they're very communicative. I feel like that is the thing that most partners want most in the world, is just to know what you're doing kind of at all times, which you can push back on, but be communicative about, how you're working on your assignments and how you're going to hit your deadlines. But identify what the people who are doing what you want to do well, how they are doing it and what you can learn from. And, just using your resources. And if there's something that you are interested in that could help you in your career, whether it's learning a little bit more about the subject matter that you practice in, or maybe it's a networking opportunity, going to a conference that your firm hasn't previously gone to, don't be afraid to ask, one, if the firm would be willing to sponsor you, or two, even if just they'll sponsor kind of your time by letting you go and, letting you have that space to network in that way or learn things in a different forum. And then on business development, keep up with your law school classmates. And I would say, don't be discouraged if you're not getting called for business yet. Like, we are still young. And I have always been told, and I hope it will come true, that it is in fact a little bit easier to bring business in when you do kind of have the partner title, just because clients feel like they're hiring somebody who's already passed some sort of litmus test. But you are laying that groundwork now, and being in things like HYLA, doing the networking, following up the way we've been talking about, you'll see the fruits of that labor down the road. And so don't give up because it seems like it's not working. And then of course, the internal networking, we didn't really talk about that today, but always just doing good work, trying to work for different partners, finding out what people are kind of focused on. And if you want to work in those different practice areas, and keeping yourself open and available to all the opportunities within your firm or your workplace. And then of course, building relationships with the clients you work for. So that is all I have today. Judge Reeder, do you have any other takeaways?
I think the only other thing I would add is, don't be afraid to ask questions of those who you can confide in. Find whether it's a mentor or just somebody that you really trust at your firm or elsewhere, kind of just ask questions about anything it is that you think you don't know, whether it's something simple. I feel like so often we sort of get stuck in things of like, oh, I feel like I should have learned this like 5 years ago and I didn't know. And so I don't want to feel stupid by asking a question about it now when it's a really simple question. We all can probably think of those things that we've had those moments. Just ask or ask somebody, that you trust. And on more complex things, ask questions to folks that you can confide in and trust of, where do you see me here? Do you see me, when you look at me as a lawyer, where do you see my career going? And I think some of those conversations can really springboard things that you didn't necessarily think about yourself. So just don't be afraid to do a little self-introspection and be vulnerable with someone else that you can trust about, thinking through some of those issues.
Well, that does bring up one great final point I wanted to make, which is on the topic of asking for help and being vulnerable. If you're ever feeling overwhelmed or like you just can't do it and need help, you've got to ask for that too. And I know for me, it's really hard because you want to convey that you are able to handle everything that is being thrown at you. And you kind of have this sense like, well, they wouldn't have asked me to do it if they didn't think I could handle it. But, sometimes partners don't appreciate the other things you have on your plate, or, they don't know what's going on in your personal life, or, maybe it just is too much. And it's not a sign of weakness to ask for help when you need it, or if you're struggling, particularly if there's any kind of mental health component, it is so much better to ask for help. And people, I think so many of us have been there. And I would say at this point, everybody like knows somebody that they love who has struggled with those sorts of things. And so just again, like using your resources. I think one of the resources is people that you can trust and confide in and figure out how to make things work if it's not working for you the way it is. You know, don't just keep going and making yourself miserable. There's probably a better option. So with that, we will take questions if anyone has any. And I guess put them in the chat box or raise your hand. I don't actually know if y'all can talk on this. Okay, maybe no questions. We covered everything, Judge Reader. This was the best CLE of all time. Okay, so in case y'all didn't see it in the chat box, we do have a CLE course number.
I think somebody asked a question.
Oh, I can't see it.
Any tips on how to develop subject matter expertise as an associate?
Well, I can start. I think some of it is repetition, you know, doing things over and over. If it's something that you're wanting to develop expertise in, so then you can go to a partner and say, let me do this. I mean, my ideas would probably be CLEs, reading articles, just kind of all the resources you can find online. If there's somebody you know at your firm that does it, or at another firm or somebody you went to law school with, you know, ask them to coffee, pick their brain, you know, figure out, is there some conference you should go to? Is there, you know, something that you could read? Like, how do I become more steeped in this? I think for most things in our profession, the answer is generally just like spending time with it.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, when we're talking about subject matter expertise, especially, you know, as a litigator, you know, you've got procedure and the rules, which is a huge part, and probably I would say the most important part of, you know, the subject area expertise you need to have. And then you sort of have your niche areas of kind of substantive law. And that is important, obviously, you know, but over time, you're going to be able to learn that, like, you know, and that translates into different things. But really, you know, as an associate, I think reading the rules over and over and over, like literally read the rules of evidence and the rules of civil procedure, like all the time. Because not only just so you can have them, you know, so you know them and have a working sense of them, but it really does help you when you're going to your next project for whatever it is, to just have a really great working understanding of the rules. And that's not saying you have to have everything memorized, rule number, and all of the different deadlines and things, but just being able to use the rules in a way that when you're having to go to something, you have a good working understanding substantively of those procedures.
And I see one now on like a totally new area of the law. And I think it's the same answer. You know, I would probably start, if it was a totally new area, with trying to find some kind of conference on it. I did once when I was at Baker Botts. I went to like an IP conference because there was a lot of IP work out of the Dallas office, and I was like, I'm going to learn about this. And what I learned was I was not going to be a great IP lawyer. It was a lot of, you know, expertise and knowledge that was a little past my playing field at that point. But I think that perhaps in a different subject area, you would learn a lot and you would feel more confident.
And I think this is one of the things that I think Zoom, especially again, I'm talking, you know, when we're talking about civil litigation, that Zoom hearings and not Zoom trials, but live streaming trials is a really great way to learn, because you can, when you're sitting at your desk, and some judges are still having Zoom hearings or having some hybrid, you know, system where at least you're live streaming your hearing. So you can kind of log on and listen to a judge's docket all day. And you'd be surprised how many different types of motions are being heard, how many different, and, you know, just learning how different lawyers argue things. You know, especially if you're at a place where you're going to be asked to go to court more, you can't just come down and sit here and watch all the time, but you can log on to Zoom and you can listen. Oh, that's how you argue a motion to compel. That's how you argue a motion for summary judgment. These are the types of questions judges ask. And then for trials as well, I still live stream all of my jury trials from the courtroom. So you can kind of watch and see how that happens, so that when you're asked to do it, it's not the first time you've seen it, which of course everybody, you know, has their, you know, first hearing and has those stories about it. But I think this is a really great way to take advantage of the technology that we've developed in the last couple of years, and that hopefully most of the courts will continue to use. Is, you can live stream a trial or live stream, all types of hearings throughout the day while you're working on other things. And it's just a really great resource to learn about, new areas that you wouldn't have known.
And there's just so much available online, like for a lot of things that if you want to double check, that you're reading the rule correctly, you can Google it, and some law firm will have put out, a 1 or 2 page or sometimes longer, something they probably did for a client at one point and then they publish. And, you always want to check that stuff. Like, you don't really know where it's coming from, just as with anything on the internet. But, if it's got citations, you go kind of look at it and you probably know more than you did going in. So I think with that, we have reached our time, and thank y'all for listening and for asking some questions. And thank you, Judge Reeder, for your time. I know you are very busy now that we are all cramming our jury trials into 2022.
I know there is a bit of a queue. So, and thank you all so much. And always feel free to reach out, email me about, not questions about cases, obviously, but if you have questions, I love to mentor young and mid-level lawyers. I am not so far removed from practice. And so, it is really a highlight of my job to be able to sort of help, new upcoming lawyers make their way. So I'm always a resource if you see me out.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who participated. And that course number was in the chat. If you didn't see it there, I'm sure you can email Lucy afterwards. And I believe this will be on YouTube if you just want to listen to it all again. So thanks again, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.